Hello, and welcome to Auto Be Careful, the place for car safety, news, and information. I'm Gene, and today we're going to be talking about car emissions. If you have a vehicle where you put liquid fuel into it and gas comes out, your car produces emissions. Now, early vehicles didn't have to comply with emission standards, but starting in the 1970s, government agencies began to require emission standards on new vehicles in order to ensure there wasn't too much pollution in the air. Manufacturers are responsible for ensuring that the new vehicles they produce comply with these emission standards before being sold to someone. However, once they're sold, the responsibility for meeting those emission standards falls to the owner of the vehicle and is enforced on a state by state basis. Since enforcement of emissions is done on a state by state basis, not all states will require it, but the majority do, and those that do require it as part of the registration process. If a vehicle passes the state's emissions testing, it will be allowed to be registered. If it does not, it will be blocked from registration until it does. This prevents a vehicle from being legally operated on the roadways until it passes the state's emissions testing. Emission standards vary by year and are going to be stricter on new vehicles than they would be on older vehicles. The Environmental Protection Agency categorizes and classifies these standards and uses a tiered system for each year and categorizes each vehicle for a year into a bin based on how much it pollutes. The way this works is for a given year, such as 2017, the EPA will categorize a vehicle into a bin based on how much it pollutes. The cleanest vehicles are going to fall into bin number one, whereas the most polluting vehicles are going to be in bin number eight. The lower the bin number, the cleaner a vehicle is going to be. Now, as years go on, the EPA will update the standards it takes to fall into each bin. For example, moving from 2017 to 2018, the EPA moved from Tier 2 standards, which used bins number 1 through 8, to Tier 3 standards, which used bins that are numbered based on how much the vehicle actually pollutes. In doing so, it actually dropped some of the lower bins qualifications, ensuring that the dirtiest vehicles produced in 2018 are actually cleaner than the dirtiest vehicles produced in 2017. So you may be asking yourself, how much does my vehicle actually pollute? It's pretty straightforward to answer this question. The first step is finding the Vehicle Emissions Control Information sticker. This sticker is pretty easy to find. It's typically located under the hood of your vehicle, but it may also be found on the engine block, on the radiator, or in the driver's door frame. Now, it is possible that your vehicle doesn't have this sticker, which can happen if your vehicle is older than 1998, if it's been previously repaired, or if the sticker has just fallen off. It's not essential to have this sticker, but if you do want a replacement, you can usually get one from your vehicle's manufacturer. There are going to be three pieces of information that you can utilize in order to determine how much your vehicle pollutes. The first is the year of regulations that the vehicle conforms to, and the other two pieces of information are the Environmental Protection Agency rating and the California Air Resources Board rating. Your vehicle may not have a California Air Resources Board rating, so we're going to focus on the Environmental Protection Agency or EPA rating that we talked about earlier, which uses bins and tiers to classify your vehicle emissions. Here are two examples of this sticker. On the Subaru, you can see that it uses the 2017 standards, which has 9 bins. And the vehicle falls into Tier 3 bin 70, which is the fifth cleanest bin out of the 9. In comparison, the Mercedes uses the 2021 standards, which has 7 bins. The Mercedes falls into Tier 3 bin 50, which is the fourth cleanest bin out of the 7. Now, since both these vehicles are using Tier 3 as their standards, they are comparable. So, since the Mercedes has a lower bin number, it is actually the cleaner vehicle. Now, as I mentioned, in 2018, the EPA switched to the Tier 3 system, which gives bin numbers that actually correspond to how much the vehicle pollutes. Prior to this, there was some decoding needed as the EPA used a simple 1 through 8 system, and so there may be some Googling you need to do in order to determine how much your vehicle pollutes if it's using the older Tier 2 system. Starting with the Tier 3 system, the bin number actually corresponds to how many milligrams per mile of emissions a vehicle produces. For example, on the Subaru, since it falls into bin 70, it produces 70 milligrams of emissions per mile. Again, the lower the bin number, the cleaner the vehicle. Now we know how much the vehicle emitted when it was new, but it's expected to maintain that standard throughout its working life. So you may be asking yourself, how is my vehicle tested for emissions? Well, that depends on how old the vehicle is. For vehicles made in 1996 or newer, this is a pretty simple test. These vehicles have what's called an onboard diagnostic or OBD port, typically located in the driver's side footwell. The testing facility will connect to this port and read data off the vehicle, which includes information about the health of the car. This data includes readings from sensors inside the vehicle in order to ensure that the vehicle is still meeting emission standards. There needs to be enough data on the vehicle and no emissions errors in order to pass the test. For older cars, this port may not exist. In these cases, the car needs to be tested with sensors that are at the testing facility. The car is essentially put on a treadmill made for cars, and a measuring device is hooked up to the exhaust to measure the amount of pollutants coming out of the vehicle when it's running. The car is then run at one or multiple speeds while the measuring device checks for pollutants coming out of the car. Once those measurements are taken, they're checked against the standards for the car's model year in order to ensure that the vehicle passes the emissions test. There are a few other tests that may be completed. These vary, but are typically targeted to these older vehicles that don't have onboard computers and diagnostic sensors. Some of these tests can be very technical, but are designed to ensure that the vehicle meets the standards set for the year that it was made. So now that we know all about emissions, we're going to get this Subaru tested over at the testing site. There's a couple things I want to note. This isn't my first time doing emissions testing, but it is my first time doing emissions testing in the state of California. So I'm interested to see if there's going to be any differences from other states. The other thing is California requires emissions testing only for vehicles that are more than 8 years old. And this is a 2017 model vehicle, so it's the first time it's going to need emissions testing. Now, California does block registration for vehicles on a passing emissions result, so I won't be able to drive this vehicle legally until we get a passing emissions test. We just finished up the emissions testing process, and as expected, this vehicle passed without any issues. Moving forward, the DMV requires emissions testing on an annual basis, and it requires emissions testing when we go to sell the vehicle. But now I can update the registration and renew it without any issues, which I'm going to do a little bit later on, so it's not part of this video. The testing facility also did a visual inspection to ensure that there wasn't too much smoke coming out of the vehicle when it was running and that all of the electrical connectors and hoses were fastened properly. The total cost of this test was $60, and once it was completed, the facility sent a digital record over to the DMV to allow me to register the vehicle for the next year. So that wraps up everything we need to know about emissions. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something, and remember to like and subscribe.